Right, well here we are, Dave, up in the Midlands. We've met all the coaches, all the captains, all the runners and riders for another season of BUCS Super Rugby. It is the 5th edition of BUCS Super Rugby. We've been here for all of them. We should be the guys who know the most. But as everyone knows across the seasons, our predictions never really go to plan. So we're not going to do any predictions, but we are going to have a little bit of a chat about the teams and their aspirations. What do you reckon, mate?
I reckon I have got the buzz after today. I'm sort of coming down after being full of adrenaline to meet new captains, same old faces, the excitement, the expectation. Pretty much everyone we've spoken to has said, well, you know, our ambition is top 4 and to get into the playoffs. So 4 teams are going to be happy, 6 are going to be really disappointed, but we're in Nottingham. We've had a great welcome at the University of Nottingham today, so why don't we start with the new kids on the block? It's a tough old league to come into, so what do you reckon?
It is a tough old league to get into, and I'll be honest, I was shocked that Nottingham even got here, because they had to go to Northumbria, play them in the playoff, and yes, Northumbria didn't have a classic season by any stretch of the imagination, but they still went into that fixture, battle-hardened, 18 Super Rugby fixtures under their belt, and we know what the step up is into this league. So for Nottingham to go there to Kingston Park, play Friday Night Lights and come away with that win, I was blown away. And having met their coach, Paul, today, who has got experience coaching Loughborough, he's got professional experience, he's a realist. He knows that the challenge ahead is going to be stiff, but they've got a hell of a captain in James Cherry. Real boy, great head and shoulders on him. They're enthusiastic, they are ambitious to not be here to not make up the numbers. And one thing we have seen from teams coming up in the past, like Swansea, they spring a shock.
Yeah.
They've been underestimated, or they've gone and they've trained really hard and they've actually proven that that league below isn't quite as big a gulf as we all think. So, yes, the toughest of assignments for Nottingham, and yeah, we're always optimists, but speaking to them today, seeing the facilities that they've got and knowing what a historic university they are for sport across the board, I think that Nottingham are going to ruffle a few feathers, and they'll definitely have Loughborough in their crosshairs to be kings of the Midlands.
When I speak to old mates who played uni rugby back when we did, they've always been surprised that Nottingham haven't been in the top division. So to have them back here kind of feels like they belong. And you talked about the division below. To finish above Newcastle, a Daz Fern-led Newcastle, that is no mean feat. So they're no mugs. I think the key is going to be when they're likely to lose in the first few weeks, because the standard is so high week in, week out, taking positives from that, not getting discouraged and building a real foothold and a platform to build on. We'll talk about Swansea in a little while and the great strides they've made, but they've shown that if you can establish yourself in this league, then absolutely anything's possible. So good luck to Nottingham.
Right, well, let's do that. Let's head to Swansea. Let's head to our Welsh correspondent, Dave Rogers, and let's talk about Swansea, because they're a team that you've seen a fair bit of. You went down to St Helens a couple of times last season. Hell of a place to have to go and get a win. What do you reckon?
Legendary ground. I grew up going to watch rugby at St Helens, and I talked to Hugh Gustafsson earlier, and he played there for Swansea RFC, and sort of hallowed turf, really. Those boys are making it a home, and it's brilliant, and it's, as you say, it's a hell of a place to go. I mean, there are a lot of difficult away days, but Swansea is right up there. But when they went on that run at the back end of last season and they beat Cardiff Met away at King Coyd in the Storm, and then they beat Bath as well, finished 5th in the league. I think the difficult thing for them now is that last year they had obvious targets. So finishing the playoffs was one, beat Cardiff University not once, not twice, but 3 times to banish the ghost of that big varsity defeat. And they've done all of those things now. So how do they push on? They've got a great group of players. I mean, Hugh Gustafsson's a great coach. They bring in a British Lion like James Hook. What an opportunity for those boys to be coached by a Lion. They've always had the underdogs tag, and they don't have that anymore. So how do they respond to that? How does that change their mentality? Does it change their mentality? If they can keep that underdogs tag and keep sort of fighting for those margins, because most of their wins last year were by less than a score, I genuinely think they can go deep. They can go fifth, they can go fourth, they can maybe get to a semi-final, and once you get to a semi-final, who knows? I'm really optimistic about Swansea.
Exciting times for the Swans. And the only Welsh side to beat Cardiff Met in BUCS Super Rugby history, and at Kincoid no less.
Yeah.
So they've got big game plays in them. They've got big game plays. What about the other Welsh side who were ruffling feathers for periods last season, but it didn't quite happen for them come the end, the ones in red, Cardiff?
Completely different to so many clubs in BUCS Super Rugby, aren't they? Because they've got a much smaller player pool. We'll move on to Exeter and Cardiff Met a little bit later on, and Hartpury and Loughborough, which are just like rugby factories. They've got what seems like hundreds of players as part of the group. Any number of them can come into the first team and do a job. I mean, I know they didn't have a great season last year, but Bath used 8 hookers. Cardiff don't have those kinds of resources. I think they've been doing pre-season with a group of about 40. So to be competitive in this league with 40 players is unbelievable. They're in a position similar to Swansea, where all of those boys that got them here, like the Maverick fly half, James Davis. What was it you said about him, about the magic play generator?
The random magic play generator.
And then the Ramage brothers as well, like unbelievable footballers at this level who've earned the right to be at BUCS Super Rugby. They're gone now, so it's time for a new group to really impose themselves on that red jersey. They've got the opportunities with the Cardiff clash. They've got the chances to pick up wins against teams. I mean, they went to Leeds Beckett and won last season, which is an incredible result for them. They need some more of them, and they need a few players in this new group to really stand up and be counted and just carry on as they're going. I think top half is probably a big ask, but they certainly belong in the league. What do you reckon?
I thought we weren't doing predictions.
Well, it's not a prediction. I'm just saying I think top half is a big ask. I think top half is a big ask. But I'm optimistic. We spoke to the vice captain a little bit earlier. They've got a great director of rugby in Alan Flower, and he's realistic as well. He knows that they haven't got 150 players. They haven't got a lot of players who've come out of academies like other clubs, but they do have a good group, a tight group who'll play for each other, and I think they could ruffle a few feathers, but maybe not as many as they'd like. Let's stay in the city then. Cardiff Met. We've seen Dr. Daniel Milton today after passing his PhD, and he's just full of the joys of life as always, isn't he?
Full of the joys of life. He's built a great programme at Cardiff Met, and you know, I think that they're one of the teams, one of the institutions that have embraced the BUCS Super Rugby era the most, and they've truly flourished to become a perennial top 4 achiever. I don't think they were as good as years gone by last season. They obviously got to the semi-finals and they were beaten in the first 20 minutes by Exeter, to be honest. Exeter went on the rampage, and while they did fight back, it was really like too tall a task to climb. We saw glimpses of their imperious performances when they beat that very same opposition, Exeter. They smashed them at Kincoid. It was a crazy scoreline to be following. But then they also lost their unblemished record against Swansea, against the Welsh teams at Kincoid. So I didn't really know what to make of them, and they've obviously churned out a host of fated Premiership players. Now you kind of just have to throw a dart at a Premiership leaderboard and you're going to find a Cardiff Met player in there or in the Championship. I don't know, man. I don't know. One thing they have done is they've retained Roma Zheng,
Yeah.
the great Roma Zheng, who burst onto the scene last season. He was only a fresher last year, but he was playing like a post-grad. They've got some mountainous men in their pack. We've met their captain today.
Boy, he's a big boy, isn't he?
He is a big lad. Oh my goodness. And you know, this is a lad who played against Toulouse in the Champions Cup last season when Cardiff were ravaged by injuries and COVID and all that sort of stuff. And then he turned down the opportunity to play against Harlequins later on. He turned down the opportunity to go on tour with the Welsh under-20s because he wanted to get a full pre-season with Cardiff Met in anticipation of BUCS Super Rugby. So that tells you everything you need to know about the culture down there. When Cardiff Met played Cardiff in the quarterfinals of BUCS Super Rugby, they had to ticket the event because they were so worried about the numbers of people that would come. So they had to ticket it, they had to get security, and they had 1,600 people come and watch a university clash for a quarterfinal at Kincoid. And if they'd had capacity, they would have sold more. So Cardiff Met are not just a good rugby programme, it is like a way of life. It is a culture, it's an identity. They've got the ultras, so whoever goes down there, they're going to struggle. I think that this year they might be at risk of not being in that top four for the first time, and maybe not by virtue of them not being as good as they have been, but by virtue of the competition coming from other areas in the table from last year.
Well, let's talk about a couple of teams that are going to want to desperately want to improve on last year's performance, starting with Bath, because they, by their own admission, had a nightmare. They came desperately close against Exeter twice. They lost by 1 and 3, both with last play tries. But aside from that, they lost to some teams they'd have expected to have beaten. They went through so many players, 8 hookers. I mean, they're lucky to even have 8 hookers on the books. I think one lad started in the sevens, ended up playing first team. That's a bit of bad luck, of course, but they're a really proud team. They're another team who feel like they belong in BUCS Super Rugby, and it feels like it's about time where they really made a dent in this competition, no?
Yeah, I think it's overdue, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is overdue. They've got the tie-up with Bath Rugby, and they've churned out some class players. Miles Reed, who captained Bath at the back end of last season in some matches. Tom Doughty, the hooker, is beginning to make his mark on Bath Rugby, and like a host of other players. But it's never quite clicked for them. They've got George Warboys, Mercurial 10, he's got a hat-trick against Exeter, and he's played for Bath as well. So there's the class there, but as you said, maybe it's lacked the consistency. And I think last season they just went on a really bad run, and it's illustrative of the league that you need to be brimming with confidence when you go into these games, otherwise you're at risk of being beaten. And once the losses begin to mount up, then it's really, really difficult to get that win, to get you out of that hole. And you could see it with Bath and the results and the performances. So I think for them, the most important thing is to get off to a flyer, get that consistency with the spine of their team performing. And as we saw last season, they're capable of beating the best sides. They should have beaten Exeter at home. They should have beaten Exeter away, but they fell asleep in the closing seconds, had their hearts broken, which created some unbelievable TV for us. But probably some sleepless nights for their coach. But
similarly with the Swansea game in the pouring rain, real 50-50 game, and Swansea had the wind in their sails. They were winning every week. Bath were the exact opposite, and when it's on a knife edge like that, very often it's the team with that positive psychology that managed to get over the line. One team that have midway through a season just decided that they were the best team in the league was Leeds Beckett, and cast your mind back to that run that they went on where they were bottom of the league, then ended up in a Twickenham final, but last season found themselves not quite rooted to the bottom, but not far off. Every time we take the cameras to a game Beckett are involved with, I think, crikey, the opponents are in for a tough 80 minutes today. They always look so physical, so well conditioned, and those are 2 words I've used for absolutely massive. They are a huge bunch of units, but it just didn't go for them last season, did it? We've seen they can be brilliant. Is this year the year?
Well, you say that every time that the TV cameras and you see them, they're brilliant. Every time I'm there and the TV cameras are there, they seem to have an implosion.
Yeah.
Like against Hartpury last year, I was so excited to see them against Hartpury last year. They'd strung together some really good results, and then they couldn't catch a cold on what was a typically bloody cold night down at Hartpury. And I don't really know what happened to them. I think that with Leeds Beckett, you're always going to get some unusual players, a box of tricks. Kerry Stevens goes into his Santa's sack of rugby players and he plucks out a monstrous prop here. He plucks out a phenom of a second row there, or a string puller at 10. So I'm always excited to see them because they play with a unique style. There is a fearlessness to them, but that fearlessness doesn't always pay off for them. And I think, again, like Bath, they probably need some consistency, and they need to go on a run, like you said a few years ago, that brought them all the way to the final, because we can see a Kerry Wood coach side on a run can be unstoppable.
What about Hartpury, the champs?
The proper champs.
Well,
The undisputed champs.
the three-time kings of Twickenham, who probably had their own entrance, they'd won this so many times. If there's any example of how quickly this league can change, then surely Hartpury last year were it.
Yeah, like, weird one for Hartpury. Like, you don't expect them to win every game throughout the season. That's not really been their style. They've been happy to have late surges come the end of the season, or just do enough to get into the playoffs. I remember them finishing so low down the ranks that they met Exeter first round, I think, and then they beat them away, and then they went all the way to Twickenham. So in terms of Hartpury, their performance in the league is not a barometer of where they're at. But one thing that we did see was that they didn't steel themselves when it came to the knockouts, which was strange to see. However, for all the years of success, that was built on, again, consistency, and again on savvy turnover of established players and integrating them with new ones. And I think that the COVID era kind of took away that rhythmic momentum that they have sustained over all these years. Obviously, new coach coming in as well, Dan Murphy, so there were learnings for him. So I think that this year, with a year under the belt and knowing Hartpury, just these ultimate winners, this rugby factory, I think that we can safely assume that there's going to be more to come from them. And, you know, they're a team who I would earmark for a bit of top four action.
Yeah, the expectation is massive there as well. When they got knocked out, I had some of the alumni, I'm not going to drop any names, but in my DM saying, oh, that's it, it's over, it's done. Because you move on from somewhere like Hartpury, you've always got an eye on it. You want them to do well, and just looking at bringing a captain in like Mitch, who's played for Swansea RFC, who's played for the Ospreys, who's played for Hartpury in the Champ, he's BUCS eligible, he's an absolute mutant scrummager. If you're using him as the cornerstone of the pack, that is some platform to build off. Three teams that we haven't spoken about.
Shall we, let's start with your lot. Let's start with your lot. Come on, Dave. The African Violet, who I feel are a sleeping giant that has been roused in the back end of last season. They finished highest up the table than they have done for a long time, and they really, almost very nearly did Durham a mischief in the semi-finals, a game that you were at and you were commentating at. So I think that there is a lot of promise, and there should be a lot of fear for Loughborough this season.
Now the cameras are rolling, I can actually talk about the beef I've got about that game, because you were at the Exeter Cardiff Met game that day in shorts and a t-shirt, putting Factor 50 on, and I was getting snowed on. I was never been so cold in my life. But yes, for 40 minutes, Loughborough gave Durham hell, and I thought this is it. Durham are going out, Loughborough are going through. Sleeping Giants a good shout, because in the BUCS Super Rugby era, they've never scaled the heights, have they? They've never been anywhere near a final, and for a team that were perennially finalists in the pre-BUCS Super Rugby era, at the end of the booster into the BUCS era, back when they were playing in maroon and white before they transferred to the African Violet, they'll have been disappointed with that. Last season, they had some great performances. Some anonymous BUCS Super Rugby directors of rugby, who I'm not going to grass up, said that they were the best team they played against all season. They haven't lost a lot of players. They brought in a few exciting new players, really exciting to see how young Charlie Bracken gets on. He's a scrum half just like his dad. I saw him for Saracens 18s. Looks really good. And is this year the year? I think they'll be disappointed if it's not. They've got to finish in the top four, because that's an improvement on last season. And once you get a home quarter final, anything's possible. I'm really excited about Loughborough this year.
I think 2012, the last time that Loughborough raised the trophy, and as you said, they've retained a huge core of that team that took them very close in the semi-final last year. If you look at the England under-20 side that got the famous victory against France, only the second victory against France under-20s ever, some of the key players in there were Loughborough. And speaking to a lot of those England under-20s, many boys who were departing from top universities, who had performed all season, they said to me, Loughborough, they're the ones to watch next season.
And Teddy looked pretty scary today as well, didn't he? He's got a steely look of focus in his eyes.
Well, Teddy Leatherbarrow, the Loughborough captain, is going to have to overcome his brother, Ollie Leatherbarrow, who is captain of the BUCS Super Rugby National Cup champions.
Before we carry on, Joe, because I'm going to stop, I know where you're going with this. We've got 2 teams left to talk about, and the first team that we discuss will depend on your answer to the following question. Who are the BUCS Super Rugby champions?
Wow. Not just shots fired, but sticks of dynamite lit and fizzing thrown in my direction. Well, if you ask Keith Fleming, he's the BUCS Super Rugby champion, and I bet if you ask Alex Key, he would disagree with him vehemently. So Durham, the league champions, Exeter, the cup champions. It depends where you lay the most importance. I'd like to win the cup personally. I'd like to win the cup, showpiece event. It's the big knockout. It's the one that's at the big stadium. But there's no denying that winning the league is the demonstration of consistency. Well, I've sort of given you an answer there, but I've also not.
Oh, you haven't at all, but you can't get splinters off a steel bench, so you're okay. Well, the league kicks off on the 28th of September, so let's talk about the league champions first then. Durham, unbelievable last year. Phenomenal team, desperately unlucky not to win the final, but they were imperious in the league. They've lost a lot of, well, BUCS Super Rugby legends, really. It's going to be interesting, maybe even difficult for them this season. How do you reckon they'll go?
Right, everyone always gets into me for hating on Durham because I always predict the team that is against them to win. And I did that a few times at the back end of last season. And to their credit, they went bonus point win after bonus point win. They went on an extraordinary run and proved me wrong. And they're fabulous hosts up there. And I love going up there. And they were worthy league champions last season. However, that league championship was forged on a backbone of titans of Durham and BUCS Super Rugby players. The likes of Marin Hoos, the likes of Fred Davis, their captain, who chimed in with over 20 tries, a whole host of other really big players in key positions like Jack Reed in the centres and a load more.
The 2 props, Monty Royston and Matt Woodward.
Yeah.
So that front row, they started 16 or 17 games. That's astonishing numbers.
So I think that they're going to struggle. I think that they're going to struggle because they're going to miss those guys. They're going to miss that forward dominance. Who knows? You know, a few fabulous players might have travelled all the way up to Hollow Drift, and I'm going to have egg on my face from game 1 to the last game of the season. And, you know, good luck to them. But I think that losing all those players, they're going to be in a tricky position. And I think that teams are going to look to target them early to get that win over Durham. And as we've spoken of before, I think that if you incur a few losses, then people start to think that you might be susceptible to B. And then that momentum gathers for opposition teams, and also it can become tough to dig yourself out of. So I'm going to say that it's going to be a tough season for the Palatinate.
They're actually a great example of the ups and downs of the league. So cast your mind back to the first couple of seasons when we were covering this league, and they were a sort of 6th, 7th or 8th place team, weren't they? They were never in the mix at the top of the league. Then you get this golden generation of great players. All of a sudden you're back-to-back champions either side of a COVID pandemic. It's how do you maintain, how do you harness that golden era with a new generation of players? And I suppose we're going to find out this season whether or not that's possible.
So last but not least, the champions, Exeter.
Okay, well, this is an area of expertise of yours.
I love you, Keezy.
Great to see Keith today, and he was in fine fettle as always. Great league campaign. I mean, it was bonus points that meant they didn't do the double. To hold their nerve in that final was bonkers and brilliant. They've lost a lot of players as well. The Joe Byrnes, London Irish, Exeter University connection continues, which is always exciting to see, but we're not talking about players moving on, we're talking about players in the here and now. And Exeter's consistency in the league over the years has been one of the things that's really stood out about the BUCS Super Rugby era.
I think that Exeter are really interesting because them winning the cup, all jokes aside, I think that for them that is getting the monkey off their back because they'd won the league a number of times and then they had failed to do the business in the knockouts. In fact, they hadn't made a final since the one that they lost to Hartpury in the first season of BUCS Super Rugby when Harry Randall scored 2 late tries to break the Exeter Hearts. So they'd won the league 2, 3 times, I can't even remember, but they'd never got to the final. And not only did they get to the final, they went and they won the cup. And I feel like emotionally that was important for them to get over. So where does their importance lay? Like, is it the league title? Is it the cup? Are they going to try and do the double? I don't know. But one thing I know is their resources are going to be stretched. They've been promoted to National 2 because they won Southwest Premier last season. National 2 is going to be bloody hard Saturdays because they have to split their resources between their Wednesday BUCS team and their Saturday team. So they are going to be going to war both days. That's going to be really, really tough. Throw into that the number of EURFC players who are involved with Exeter Chiefs. Everyone knows about the Rockstar players, Chris Yunza and David James, but I think that there's a huge core that have been training with them all season. A lot of them haven't even been into pre-season with EURFC because the Chiefs like them so much. With Premiership Cup coming up, with internationals on the horizon, I think that they could, find themselves depleted in those areas, stretched across the 2 divisions. So that's going to be a challenge, but if there's a man who can overcome that challenge, it's the old war horse, Keith Fleming. And, as you said, Exeter, for many, they're the gold standard, aren't they? They're up there always. They are so tough to beat at Topsham, so tough to beat anywhere. So they're going to be up there. They're going to be in the top 4, in my opinion, but I think it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be opportunities to take them down at various points in the season.
Jacob Morris and Finn Richardson as well, 2 props that have just signed with Exeter, who are URFC. And when you think about Dav and Chris, 2 Rockstar second rows, 2 Rockstar props, if you put those into a BUCS Super Rugby team, then you've got one hand on the trophy already, but they're going to be playing Champions Cup or Premiership or Prem Cup instead. It just shows the level, the expectation of the level that these boys have to be at. If you can play BSR on a Wednesday, the likelihood is you can play Champ or Prem or another level beyond that on a Saturday. It's quite crazy, really.
Anyway, Davo, I think that I got about 10% of all my predictions right last season, and for right now, it's all pie in the sky. So there's only one way to find out for real, isn't there?
28th of September, it all kicks off. Join us live on BUCS YouTube. Can't wait. See you then.